The sun was a white fire overhead beating down on the desert floor like it was trying to burn the past off the earth. Red dust clung to everything's skin-hair thoughts. It filled the cracks in their lips, lined the soles of bare feet, settled deep into the folds of a worn deerskin shawl now wrapped tight around a mother's shoulders. Ayanna kept walking. Her knees buckled for half a breath, just enough to send a ripple of fear down the line of children trailing behind her. She didn't fall. She couldn't. The smallest one, Suni, held the hem of her skirt like it was a lifeline. Her baby boy, Taza, no more than a year old, hung limp against her chest, too tired to cry. They had walked 70 miles in 5 days. No wagon, no horse. Just feet on rock hunger in their stomachs and silence in the places that used to hold prayers. Somewhere behind her, Tomasito, age 12, murmured to his brother to keep moving. He said it soft, like a warning not to draw attention. Ayanna didn't turn around. She could hear the pain in their steps. She could feel it in her own spine. Every part of her body screamed to stop. She didn't, because if she stopped, she knew she wouldn't rise again. A gust of wind tore across the path, lifting grit into her eyes. She winced. Her legs shook. And then she heard it. The voice that stopped her breath cold. Ma. Ma. It was Suni, her voice thin and frightened. Ayanna didn't want to hear the rest, didn't want her child to say it out loud. But she looked down anyway. Suni's face was flushed, her eyes too big, too knowing for a 6-year-old. Mama, if you fall, we'll all fall. Right. Ayanna didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was cracked from thirst and grief. But the question hung there, heavy as the desert sun. And then with all the strength she had left, Ayanna straightened her back and whispered, raw hoarse, full of every ounce of will she still owned. If I fall, they all fall with me. 10 minutes later, she almost collapsed anyway. They crested the last rise before the road dipped into a narrow gulch, Red Gulch, the maps had said. What she saw below made her heart lurch, a small town, barely 30 buildings, sun-bleached and wind-bitten. There was a church with a sagging bell tower, a saloon, a store with no sign. And just beyond town, what looked like a ranch, fences, half-rotted smoke, curling from a chimney. Maybe this was the place. But Ayanna knew what would happen. It had happened in 3 towns before this. She would knock, they would stare, and someone would say, no work, no room, not for you, not for 9 mouths. And then the door would close. Still, she led them on. By the time they reached the edge of the dirt road that split the town, the children were silent as shadows. No one begged. No one asked for water. They had learned not to. Ayanna adjusted the baby in her sling and crossed the dusty street. A man stepped out of the general store as she approached. He froze at the sight of her and the children. His lip curled. Without a word, he turned back inside and shut the door. One by one, windows seemed to shut around them. She walked faster, heart pounding. Her knees threatened again. The dust swirled around her boots like ghosts trying to drag her down. She stopped in front of the last house before the town faded into scrub. It looked like someone still lived there. Smoke, chopped wood. She raised her hand to knock. The door creaked open. A pale man stepped out, saw her, and shut it with finality. That was it. Ayanna stood there for a long moment. Her hand dropped. Her chest rose and fell in silence. She turned to look at her children. Some of them stared at the ground. Others just stared at her. Then her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, hands catching her weight. The baby let out a soft cry. Tomasito rushed to her side, but she held up a hand. She had nothing left. The dust started to settle, and that's when she heard it. Hooves, slow, steady, coming from the ridge. She looked up, squinting through the sun haze. A horse, a tall one, chestnut, saddle worn but well kept, and on its back a man, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, shirt rolled to the elbow. He rode like someone who knew the land. He stopped 20 feet from her and just watched. Ayana pushed herself upright, placing her body between the stranger and her children. Tomasito took a step forward, tense. The children were trembling. The rider swung off his horse with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He took in the scene with eyes the color of storm clouds, gray, unreadable. And then, to everyone's surprise, it was Suni who stepped forward. Her voice wobbled. "Mister," she said, "they said we ruin everything. Do we?" The wind picked up again. Ayana's heart froze. The man crouched down to Suni's height, eye level. He studied her, then looked at each child in turn, then back to Ayana. And then he said the words that would change all their lives. "Good." He stood slowly. "Because I want all of you." Ayana blinked, stunned. Tomasito stared. "All 9. The man's voice was steady. "All 9. And your mother, too." Then he tipped his hat. "Name's Carter McBride. I've got land west of here." "Room enough?" "No." No questions asked. No one moved. Carter stepped back. He didn't push. Just reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a cloth bundle. He laid them down on the ground, close but not too close. "I'll be up by the fence if you want to follow." He turned, walked back to his horse, mounted, and rode off without looking back. Ayana stared after him, then at the bundle. Her body ached. Her spirit shook. But inside her chest, something flickered. Not relief, not yet. But maybe hope. The dirt road curved westward, narrowing into a trail barely wide enough for Carter's horse. He rode ahead at a slow pace, giving the family space, not turning around, not saying a word. His silhouette was steady against the sinking sun, as if he belonged to the horizon itself. Ayana followed behind him, each step aching but steadier than the last. She held her baby tighter against her chest. The canteen Carter had left now hung from Tomasito's shoulder, half full, passed carefully between the children. The cloth bundle had revealed hard biscuits and jerky enough to bring the color back to their cheeks, if only faintly. The land shifted as they walked. Less dust, more brush. Mesquite trees cast long shadows, and the red cliffs of the gulch began to rise on either side. They walked in silence for nearly an hour before the first building came into view, a weather-worn barn with sun-bleached boards and a slanted roof standing like it had held its ground against 100 storms. Then came the house. Modest square porch wide. One shutter swung gently in the breeze. The front door stood open. Carter stopped his horse and dismounted. He didn't speak. He tied the reins to a post and walked to the porch steps. Then he turned. His gaze settled on Ayana. She froze, uncertain. The children hovered close, unsure if this was the end of the road or the start of something else. Carter's voice came low and level. "You walk first," he said, holding the door open with one calloused hand. "This house is yours before it's mine." She didn't move. No man had ever said words like that to her. Not her late husband, not the judge who'd signed away her land, not any of the storekeepers who turned their backs when she begged for work. Ayana felt the wind tug at her shawl. Her throat ached. She stepped forward. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots as she crossed the threshold. The air inside the house was still carrying the scent of dust and pine smoke. There were no fine furnishings, no curtains on the windows, but there was space. Space to breathe. Space to exist. The children filed in behind her, their eyes wide. Taza whimpered softly against her chest, but didn't cry. Carter didn't follow them inside. He stood at the porch, back-turned, gaze fixed on the barn. He gave them the house without taking a single step inside. That night, they slept in the barn loft, nested in clean straw and wrapped in old patchwork quilts. There were no words exchanged as they lay down, just the soft rustle of limbs, finding comfort and stillness for the first time in weeks. Ayanna stayed awake longest. She lay on her side, one hand on Taza's back, listening to the breath of her children, to the creak of the barn beams in the wind. She could hear Carter moving outside, quiet and deliberate, repairing the loose slats on the barn wall, reinforcing the door latch, patching holes in the roof with canvas. He never came close, never interrupted, just worked. It was the first time in months she hadn't braced for danger in the dark. The next morning broke gentle and slow. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the cracks. Ayanna rose before the others, easing her baby onto the quilt and stepping outside with bare feet. The ground was cool. Her legs ached, but her mind was sharp. Across the yard, Carter was already splitting wood near the fence line. He looked up briefly and nodded once. That was all. As the children stirred, Carter carried a basket to the porch and set it down. Inside was warm bread, coarse and thick, still steaming. He didn't stay to watch them eat. They gathered on the steps in silence. No one said grace. No one spoke at all. They ate slowly, as if the food might vanish if they looked too hungry. Tomasito broke the last slice in half and handed the bigger piece to Suni. She looked at him confused, but took it. Afterward, Carter returned with tin mugs. He handed the stronger ones black coffee, the younger ones a watered-down version with a spoonful of sugar. Still no conversation. Still no expectations. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small wooden spoon from his back pocket and walked over to Tomasito. Held it out. "This is for the salt," Carter said. "You're in charge of measuring, not dumping. Understand?" Tomasito blinked. "Me?" Carter gave the barest shrug. "You're the man of your bunch, right? Seems fair." The boy took the spoon like it was a medal. Ayanna watched from the side, heart tight. She didn't say a word, but inside her something cracked, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar weight of respect. Later that morning, the children helped gather kindling while Ayanna set to scrubbing their clothes in the water trough. Her hands, blistered and raw, moved with purpose. She tied her hair back with a fraying ribbon and rolled up her sleeves. The barn needed order, so she gave it order. She stacked tools, swept dust, shook out moldy sacks, and ignored the way her muscles trembled. When she returned to the porch, she found something leaning just inside the doorway. A pair of boots, not new but barely worn, wrapped in a cloth. No note. They were her size. She stared at them for a long moment, then picked them up and carried them into the house. Her hands trembled. That afternoon, as the sun tilted westward, Carter gathered the children beneath the old cottonwood tree behind the barn. He picked up a stick and pointed to the clouds. "You see those clouds? The way they lean east means winds dropping from the ridge. Colder nights ahead." They listened. He showed them how to test wood for dampness, how to stack it so it burned clean, how to watch the grass bend before the weather changed. His voice stayed low, calm. When one of the girls dropped a branch and flinched, he only said, Try again, and waited. By mid-afternoon, something strange happened. Laughter. Not loud, not constant, but real. Short bursts from behind hay bales. Quiet giggles under their breath. Ayanna heard it from the barn where she hung their wet clothes on a makeshift line. She froze for a second. Then she smiled. Just a little. It wasn't love. Not yet. Not safety, not certainty. But it was a breath. A space. A place where her children could laugh and not be punished for it. A place where maybe she didn't have to carry every burden alone. As the sun began to set, she stepped onto the porch, holding Taza in one arm. Carter sat nearby, sharpening a blade, eyes cast toward the fields. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You walk first," he'd said not long ago. And she had. But now, maybe she was ready to take the next step. Not just walk forward, but stay. Tomorrow she'd go into town again. They needed flour, and she knew what would be waiting there. Whispers, eyes, the past. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The wind carried the smell of sun-warmed wood and distant horses as Ayanna folded a dry quilt over the porch railing. The sky was pale blue, but thin clouds stretched low, brushing the horizon like a warning. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, but her mind was on tomorrow. She was going into town. They were nearly out of flour, and if she waited too long, the little ones would go without. Again. The thought gnawed at her even as the softness of clean blankets under her fingers should have brought peace. Inside, Taza stirred in his sleep. The older kids were by the barn, dragging a broken wheelbarrow out of the weeds, inventing games that sounded almost like real play. Almost. For now. She looked across the yard to the field where Carter was driving fence posts into the ground. Shirt damp with sweat sleeves rolled, movements slow but relentless. He hadn't said more than a handful of words all day. He didn't need to. His presence was constant, like the sun or the sound of the windmill creaking on still afternoons. Ayanna wasn't sure what to make of that yet. That evening, as she scrubbed the last tin bowl from supper, she saw movement beyond the gate. A woman on a mule. The figure dismounted, tying the reins loosely to the post. Ayanna stood still, hands dripping sudsy water. Her body tensed, not out of fear exactly, but habit. The woman was tall and broad-hipped skin, the warm shade of mesquite bark hair braided down her back. She wore a skirt tucked at the sides and a red bandana around her throat. Her face was lined, sun-weathered, familiar with long rides and longer silences. She held a basket. "You're the woman Carter took in," she said, voice smooth and deep. Ayanna didn't answer right away. She nodded once. The woman looked at her. Not through her, at her. "I'm Chava," she said. "I work a few ridges south, mostly mending tack and tending goats." Still, Ayanna said nothing. Chava walked past her and placed the basket on the porch, then stepped back. Inside, cornmeal, a few dried chiles, 2 red apples, and a twist of sweet tobacco. "Wasn't sure what you needed, so I brought what I had." Ayanna narrowed her eyes slightly. Why? Chava tilted her head. "Because I've been the woman in someone else's doorway, holding my children's hands and hearing." The words landed heavy. Chava pulled the red scarf from her neck and dabbed her face. "Folks around here, they'll say Carter's soft in the head. They'll say you're using him. But what they won't say is that every one of them shut their doors on you." She paused, gaze steady. "It's not charity if you choose them." Ayanna didn't respond right away, but something in her chest loosened just slightly. Not quite trust. Not yet. But the edge of something like it. "You have children?" she asked finally. Chava's face changed just for a breath. Had. Won. Long gone now. They stood there in silence as the light faded and the crickets began to hum. Finally, Ayana reached down and picked up the basket. "Thank you," she said softly. Chava tipped her chin. "I come by here sometimes, drop things off. You won't see me every day, but if you do, you'll know why." She turned to leave, but before she mounted her mule, she added, "You keep your eyes up in town tomorrow. Walk like you belong. Because you do." Then she rode off into the dusk, the sound of hooves fading like a memory. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Ayana sat by the fire Carter had built behind the barn. He didn't speak when she joined him. He handed her a cup of chicory and sat back, carving a notch into a piece of fence rail. She sipped in silence. "Your friend," she said, eventually. "Chava. She left food." Carter didn't look up. "She does that. She says people in town won't like seeing me come back." "They won't," Carter said simply. She turned her head. "And you? What will you say when they start talking about you?" He shrugged. "Don't much care what cowards whisper when they lock their doors." Ayana didn't smile, but she breathed easier. The fire popped. "You don't say much," she murmured. "No need to say what doesn't change anything." She studied the firelight on his face. The rough stubble, the quiet in his eyes that wasn't cold, just old. She wondered how many years it had been since someone asked him what he wanted. "You live out here alone for long?" she asked. Carter nodded once, long enough to stop counting. The stars were beginning to show. "I go to town tomorrow," she said. He nodded again. "Take Tomasito with you." "I plan to." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out 2 coins. "Flour. Soap. Don't let them cheat you." She took the coins, surprised by how tightly her fingers curled around them. "If they spit," she asked, voice steady, "if they stare, you still want us here?" Carter's eyes met hers across the fire. "You're not here because I want you," he said slowly. "You're here because you chose to walk through that door." She looked down at the coins in her palm. A strange warmth moved through her. Not comfort, exactly, but the beginning of something like dignity. She rose from the log and turned to leave. "Thank you," she said. But Carter only tipped his hat and went back to carving like nothing at all had changed. The next morning, Ayana dressed in the cleanest clothes she owned. She tied her hair back, brushed off the dirt from her skirt, and wrapped Taza close to her chest. Tomasito walked beside her, taller than he looked the week before. They made the trip in silence. When they reached town, the air shifted. Eyes found them. She felt it before the first whisper. Saw curtains flutter closed. A boy muttered something sharp as she passed. A woman clutched her child's arm too tightly. Ayana kept walking, her back straight, her chin up. Tomasito held her hand. The storekeeper didn't speak as she placed the flour on the counter. Didn't offer a bag. Just dropped the change hard enough for her to hear the insult in the silence. But Ayana took the coins with a steady hand. Outside, someone spat near her feet. Tomasito tensed. "Don't," she murmured. "Keep walking." Back at the edge of town, she looked over her shoulder once, then turned away. By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was dipping low. The others ran to meet them, surrounding her, laughing, clinging to her skirt. She handed Suni an apple from Chava's basket. Suni beamed. "Is it just for me? You can share if you like," Ayana said. That night, she placed the new sack of flour in the cupboard beside the bread Carter had baked. She touched the edge of the wood and breathed in the smell of warm grain and pine smoke. Tomorrow she knew wouldn't be easier. But tonight, she had food fire and her children sleeping under a roof they hadn't been asked to earn. She didn't belong in town. But here maybe she was starting to. That night, the wind blew hard through Red Gulch, whispering through the cracks in the barn and setting the cottonwood leaves to rustling like old bones. Ayanna lay awake in the loft, her baby pressed close against her chest, one hand draped protectively over Suni, who had curled tight against her side. The others were strewn across the quilts like dropped branches, limbs tangled, mouths slightly open in sleep. Tomasito snored softly. Even with the wind, even with her back aching, and her arms still raw from scrubbing, Ayanna could hear their breathing. 9 children. 9 steady, uneven, precious little breaths. She closed her eyes and listened. This wasn't silence. Not anymore. This was life. She rose quietly and climbed down the loft ladder, barefoot, avoiding the loose rung she already knew to skip. Outside, the yard glowed pale under a low moon. Carter was across the way hammering something along the roof edge of the chicken coop. He turned when he saw her but didn't speak. He just nodded toward the kettle on the porch rail. Still warm. She poured herself a half cup and leaned against the post, letting the heat soak into her palms. Carter hammered twice more, then set the board down and walked over. He stood beside her, not too close, not too far. She gestured with her cup toward the barn behind them. "You hear that?" Carter tilted his head slightly, listening. Ayanna smiled faintly. Breathing. All of them. Out of sync, raspy, crooked, but breathing. He glanced at her, something soft in his gaze. "This place hasn't heard children breathe in a long time," he said. She didn't answer, just looked out toward the horizon, where the sky was breaking into the faintest silver. Later that morning, she sent Tomasito and 2 of the girls out to gather wild sage for drying. The air still held the weight of the night's wind, but the sun was rising warm, steady. Ayanna knelt by the trough, wringing out yesterday's laundry. Suni brought a cracked wooden bowl and placed it carefully beside her. "What's this?" Ayanna asked. "Chava left it." "By the gate," Suni said proudly. She didn't say anything, just waved once. Inside the bowl was a small wedge of goat cheese, soft and yellowing, and a folded scrap of paper. On it, for strength, "We all need some." "Si." Ayanna set the note aside and rubbed her arm across her damp forehead. She wasn't used to being thought of. Not like this. "Put it in the shade," she told Suni. "We'll share it at supper." Not long after, Carter appeared from the barn, carrying a short ladder, followed by a cloud of dust and 2 chickens. He stopped beside Ayanna and pointed toward the slope behind the house. "See that trail up there?" She looked where he gestured. A narrow path curved into the rocks, nearly invisible from below. "There's someone I want your boys to meet," he said. "Name's Talon. Lives up there. Apache like you. Lost a leg in the war but still sharp as a blade. He'll teach 'em more than I can." Ayanna arched a brow. "He's willing," Carter shrugged. "Didn't say he was, but he might be." By midday, she sent Tomasito and 2 of the older boys up the trail, each carrying a small jar of dried berries as offering. She watched them disappear into the rocks with a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Not fear, not worry. Just wait. Wait from letting go. The rest of the day passed quietly. She patched a torn shirt, helped Suni pick cactus fruit, scraped the dirt from the last set of boots Carter had given them from his shed. She said little, but her mind moved constantly. Late afternoon came, and with it her sons returning, faces flushed, eyes wide, dusty, and exhilarated. Tomasito couldn't stop talking. He has a hawk, Mama. An actual hawk, he calls it Smoke. Said it listens better than most men do. And he taught us to tell time by the rocks, one of the others added, by how the shadow changes at the ridge. Ayana watched them with cautious eyes. And did he say you could return? Tomasito nodded. He said, bring kindling next time. Don't show up empty. But he didn't say no. That was enough. That evening, Carter lit the fire pit near the porch, and Ayana brought out the cheese from Chava, cutting it into uneven wedges. They ate quietly, but the air between them was warmer, less uncertain. After the meal, Carter gathered all the children beneath the cottonwood. They sat on the dirt legs crossed, watching him as he squatted beside them with a stick in hand. You see those clouds? He asked, pointing to the thin band of gray along the far ridge. They lean low like that. It means the wind's pulling cold from the west. You'll feel it in your bones before it hits. He tapped the earth. Out here, weather tells you things if you know how to listen. He taught them how to find dry wood under brush, how to test bark with their thumbs, how to stack fuel so the fire breathes and doesn't choke. His voice never rose, never scolded. When one of the younger boys dropped a bundle, Carter only said, try again, and waited. Ayana stood by the barn with her arms crossed, watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct, just observed as her children soaked up knowledge like sponge-soaked rain. It wasn't just firewood they were learning. It was steadiness, confidence. Tomorrow she'd climb the trail herself. She'd meet the old man Carter trusted. If he'd speak to her, she'd listen. But tonight, she let her children's laughter echo off the cliffs. A sound this ranch hadn't known in years. A sound she hadn't allowed herself to believe might return. She leaned back against the barn wall, the scent of sage and smoke clinging to her clothes. And for the first time since walking away from everything she'd ever known, Ayana wasn't just surviving. She was becoming part of something, maybe even shaping it. She closed her eyes and listened again. To the breathing, to the fire, to the land. The trail to the ridge was barely a path, more a memory carved into the rock by boot heels and rainfall. Ayana climbed it alone the next morning, the sun still low enough that the cliffs cast long shadows across her back. Her legs ached, but she climbed anyway, one hand gripping the strap of a canvas bag filled with dried roots, jerky, and firewood payment of a sort. She wasn't used to asking favors, and she wasn't sure she was doing that now. Tomasito had said the man was old, sharp-eyed, missing a leg, and lived with a hawk. Ayana had heard of him in whispers years ago, old Talon, a scout, a survivor, half myth to some holy Apache to those who remembered. When she reached the final bend, she paused, catching her breath. The air was thinner up here, touched with juniper, and a bite of cold that hadn't reached the valley yet. A clearing opened before her, ringed with stone and wind-worn trees. At the far end, a small wooden shelter stood, half tent, half lean-to. Beside it, crouched on a rock like a shadow with wings, was a hawk. And not far from it, a man sat carving a piece of bone with a knife worn thin at the grip. He didn't look up when she stepped into the clearing. Your boys brought kindling, he said flatly. Didn't say you would. I brought more, she replied. She walked forward and set the bundle down near the fire pit. The hawk clicked its beak, but didn't move. Talon looked up. His face was dark and deeply lined skin stretched over bone like carved wood. One pant leg was tied off just below the knee, the rest empty. His eyes, though, were alive, fierce, sharp enough to cut through anything soft. You, Ayana? He asked. I am. I knew your husband. She nodded. He said you were dead. I said that once too. Still wrong. He stared at her for a long beat, then pointed to a flat rock across the fire pit. Sit. She obeyed. Talon reached down, grabbed a stick, and tossed it into the pit. You want something? No, she said. Then after a breath, not for me. He nodded once. Good. I don't do pity or lost causes. She didn't flinch. Neither do I. They sat in silence while the wind shifted above them. After a while, he asked, Why'd you come to show my face? If you're teaching my boys, I want you to know who raised them. Talon gave the smallest of smiles. Then you've done right. He leaned back against a flat stone and looked at the sky. They're wild still. That's good. They listen with their eyes more than their ears, though. Ayanna smiled softly. They get that from me. Talon let out a sound halfway between a grunt and a laugh. Probably. He paused, then reached for his cane and pushed himself upright with effort. You know what the land teaches better than any man. She waited. He pointed toward the gulch below, wind. Wind tells the truth before people do. He turned to face her, eyes narrowed. You don't fight the wind, you read it. Ayanna didn't answer, but she understood. By the time she descended the ridge, the sun was high and her legs felt like fire. She reached the bottom to find Suni and Tomasito arguing over a broken toy, and Carter crouched beside the chicken coop, wrangling a stubborn hen with one hand and holding a length of wire in the other. When he saw her, he nodded. He talk? She dropped the now empty bag on the porch. Enough. Good. Carter stood and dusted off his hands. He doesn't say much, but what he says you'll want to remember. Ayanna paused, brushing dirt from her skirt. He'll keep teaching them, he will. Why? Because they're worth it. She met his eyes then. Really looked. That night's supper was simple flatbread with beans, water from the well, and slivers of apple Chava had left again by the fence line. Ayanna divided everything evenly and gave the biggest slice to Tomasito, who gave half to his youngest brother without being told. Afterward, they sat on the porch steps, the air finally cooling. The sky was streaked with purple and gold stars, just beginning to poke through. The children's chatter faded one by one until only Tomasito and Suni remained whispering something about hawks and how they could maybe tame one too. Ayanna stayed quiet, rocking slightly with Taza on her lap, his head tucked under her chin. Carter joined her after a while, settling on the edge of the step without a word. You ever think, she said softly, how much noise silence can hold? Carter tilted his head. Every night. They sat like that until the stars came fully out. In the morning, Ayanna found the old hammer hanging from the barn wall and the bent nails Carter had left near the shed. She spent 2 hours fixing the latch on the door that always caught in the wind. She didn't ask permission. Carter passed by only once carrying a sack of feed and paused. He didn't say anything, just looked at the fixed door and moved on. That was thanks enough. Later, as the children ran through the yard playing some game that involved chasing and falling and laughing too loud, Ayanna stood by the water trough wringing out the last shirt of the day. Suni crashed into her leg, mid-run, giggling breathlessly. Mama, can we keep the hawk? Ayanna smirked. Catch it first. Carter leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, watching the chaos. They're loud, he said. I know. They weren't before. I know. He looked at her. You mind? She shook her head. No, not anymore. The days were still hard. The town still stared. But the children laughed louder now, slept deeper, ate without rushing, and she no longer listened just for breathing. She listened for joy. And it was there, thin as a thread, but holding. The road into Red Gulch felt different the second time, though Ayanna couldn't explain why. The dirt still kicked up, the sun still bore down from above, like it had something to prove, and the wooden storefronts still leaned with the weight of too many seasons. But her step was firmer. Not faster, she wasn't rushing. Just steadier. This time she walked with two of the older girls beside her, not Tomasito. He had gone up to Talon's again, carrying dried herbs and a coil of rope Carter had set aside for trade. It was good for the boys to have a place to go that wasn't just survival. Ayanna was starting to see that now, starting to believe it might matter. Suni walked ahead barefoot again, even though the boots Carter had left were finally worn in. The child claimed she could feel the weather better with her feet on the ground. Ayanna didn't argue. They reached the general store just as the midday heat settled. The porch creaked under her boots. Inside, the same shopkeeper stood behind the counter, thin and sour-faced, like the dust had worn down every kind thought he'd ever had. Ayanna placed the bag of trade goods on the wood-dried berries, sage, 2 eggs wrapped in cloth. "We need sugar," she said plainly, "and more soap." The man looked at the items like they were scraps from a beggar's fire. He said nothing, just reached behind him, pulled the sugar down without weighing it, and dropped it into her bag. He didn't give the soap. She waited. "I brought more than last time," she said. He grunted. "Ain't charity." Ayanna's voice stayed low. "I didn't ask for charity." She held his eyes. Behind her, one of the girls shifted, nervous. The shopkeeper tossed the soap onto the counter like it offended him, then turned away before she could say another word. As they stepped back outside, the whispers started just like before. "There goes that Apache woman, still hanging on to McBride's kindness like a leech. He's feeding 10 mouths now. Ain't natural." Ayanna didn't turn her head, but her jaw tightened. On the boardwalk across the way, a man tipped his hat with a sneer that wasn't politeness. His companion laughed behind his hand. She looked straight ahead and kept walking. They made it halfway to the mule post before someone spat near her feet. Not on her, but close enough. This time Suni stopped walking. The girl stared down at the dark mark in the dust, then up at the man who did it. He smirked, arms crossed. Suni opened her mouth, but Ayanna put a hand on her shoulder before she could speak. "Keep walking," she said. But Mama Ayanna's voice lowered just enough. "We don't waste breath on people who only know how to spit." They left town with their heads high, even if their stomachs burned. When they returned to the ranch, Carter was mending a section of fence near the dry creek bed. He didn't look up until they'd crossed the yard. When he saw the lines in Ayanna's face, he straightened. "Bad?" he asked. She nodded once. "Not worse than last time." He took the bag from her gently. "That still counts as bad." Later that evening, as the children chased chickens and laughter back through the yard, Ayanna worked in the kitchen. She unwrapped the sugar, set the soap aside, and began kneading dough with arms that trembled more from restraint than effort. She wasn't angry, not in the way fire is angry. She was tired. Tired of pretending her presence wasn't a disruption. Tired of having to prove over and over that needing help wasn't the same as being helpless. The dough didn't rise right. Her mind was somewhere else. At dusk, she stepped out onto the porch, Taza on her hip, and watched the last of the sun fall behind the ridge. The air was cooling fast, and that's when she saw Carter standing by the gate just outside the fence line. Motionless, like he'd been standing there for hours. She walked down the steps, slowly barefoot, crossing the yard toward him. He didn't move. When she stopped a few feet away, he spoke without looking at her. "You thinking about leaving again?" The question landed like a stone between them. She didn't answer right away, just adjusted Taza on her hip and exhaled. "I thought about it," she admitted. "Back in town when they stared like I was stealing something by just being there. When they made sure my daughter saw it." Carter nodded slightly. "I stood outside the post and thought maybe it's better if we just go. Find a canyon nobody knows, make it ours." He finally looked at her. "So why didn't you?" Ayana met his gaze. "Because she looked up at me and didn't flinch," she said. "Because my children laughed today, even after the looks. Because this house smells like flour again, even if the bread doesn't rise right." She looked toward the barn where candlelight glowed faint through the slats. "Because you didn't ask me to earn my place here." Carter shifted his stance slightly, the leather of his boots creaking. "You survived storms worse than gossip," he said. "Don't let cowards decide your worth." The wind moved between them, colder now, but not biting. Taza murmured against her shoulder, and she kissed the top of his head. Carter glanced toward the barn. "They won't stop," he said. "Not soon. Maybe not ever." Ayana nodded. "I know. But they'll run out of breath before you run out of will." She smiled then, just barely. He tilted his head toward the house. "Supper burned it," she admitted. "We'll eat it anyway," he replied. That night, the children sat close on the kitchen floor, chewing tough bread with wide smiles and loud opinions about whose piece had the most flavor. Tomasito pretended to gag dramatically. "It tastes like fencewood," he said. "It tastes like freedom." Ayana replied, raising a brow. He blinked, then grinned. "Freedom's chewy." Later, after they'd gone to sleep and the fire had died down to embers, Ayana sat by the window. The stars were out, scattered like blessings across the sky. She didn't feel welcome in town. She might never. But when she looked around this house at the worn floorboards, the smell of old quilts and clean soap, the sound of her children's steady breathing, she felt something far more powerful than welcome. She felt rooted. The wind rattled the shutters once, then stilled, and Ayana didn't move. She didn't run. She stayed. The moon was high, casting a faint silver glow over the yard, when Ayana slid the barn door open with practiced silence. Her pack was already full: blankets, dried beans, water, a dull knife she'd tucked beneath Taza's swaddling cloth. She hadn't meant to get this far. She'd only stepped outside to clear her head, to breathe. But now she stood beside the fence, heart-pounding bag on her back, baby asleep in her arms, and the gate just a few steps away. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. No chickens clucking. No Carter hammering boards. No whispers from the kids. They'd all gone to bed hours ago, worn out from laughter and sun. And yet Ayana felt watched. Not threatened, just seen. Fully, painfully seen. She hesitated. Not because she doubted the plan, there wasn't really a plan, but because something in her chest pulsed hard against her ribs, like her body was begging her to wait, to stay. Just a little longer. Then a voice came from behind her. Calm, low, firm. "You were already halfway out the gate, weren't you?" She froze. Carter stood in the shadow of the corral arms, crossed boots dusted white by moonlight. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step closer. Ayana turned slowly. Taza stirred but didn't wake. "I wasn't running," she said, even though she knew it wasn't true. "You didn't say goodbye," he replied. "That's running." She gripped the strap of her bag tighter. I thought if we left now before dawn, we'd be far enough by noon that nobody could find us. Find you for what? She didn't answer. Carter took a step forward, but kept a respectful distance. His voice stayed even. What happened? Ayanna swallowed hard. Nothing new, same looks, same whispers. Some woman in town said you were a fool, that I was just waiting to take what I needed and vanish. Were you? He asked. Her jaw tightened. I was trying to protect you. Carter's expression didn't change. From what? From them. From the whole damn town turning on you because of me. Because I showed up with mouths to feed and dirt on my skin. He was silent for a long moment. Then I knew who you were the day I saw you on that road. And I let you walk through my door anyway. Ayanna's voice cracked. Maybe that was your mistake. No, he said simply. It was my choice. The wind rustled the dry grass at their feet. Ayanna shifted her weight, feeling the ache in her shoulders from the bag. She looked toward the hills. I've carried these children across more land than I can count, she said. Through towns that hated us. Through winters with no firewood. And I've watched them sleep in dirt, eat weeds, and still hold on to joy. She blinked hard. But I can't watch them become a burden to someone who didn't ask for them. Carter stepped closer but still didn't touch her. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I asked. She looked up sharply. I didn't say it with a ring or promises or pretty words, but when I said, I want all of you, I meant all of you. Ayanna shook her head. You don't know what that means. You think it's just a roof and some extra food. But it's fear. It's sickness and bills and nightmares. It's a baby who cries at midnight and a boy who still flinches when he hears shouting. It's a whole tribe of broken pieces. Carter's voice didn't waver. Then I guess we patch each other up. Taza stirred, pressing his face into her chest. Ayanna looked down, brushed a hand over his dark hair, her thumb trembling. Do you still want us? She asked, voice raw. I never stopped. She exhaled. The pack suddenly felt heavier than ever. He held out a hand, not to take the baby, not to grab her, but just open, waiting. Ayanna didn't take it, but she didn't walk away either. I don't know how to stay, she whispered. Carter nodded. That's okay. You just don't leave. She let the pack slide off her shoulder and hit the dirt with a soft thud. He didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted like the weight between them had been shared, not lifted. She turned back toward the barn steps, slower now. Carter walked beside her, not speaking. The wind had quieted. Inside, the children were still asleep, curled together in piles of limbs and patched quilts. Ayanna laid Taza back down and sat beside him for a moment, just watching. Later, she stepped outside again. Carter stood near the porch, leaning against a post. I'm not a soft man, he said. Never was. I know. And this place, it doesn't fix people. It just gives them space. That's more than we've ever had. He looked at her like he wanted to say something more but thought better of it. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a small piece of folded canvas. What is it? She asked. Patch for your water sack, he said. It leaks. She smiled for the first time that day. You planning for me to leave again? Just planning. She nodded. Thank you. He tipped his hat and she went back inside. That night, as the ranch settled into sleep, Ayanna sat on the barn floor or back against the wall and looked up through the slats at the stars. She'd nearly left. Again. But something had stopped her. Not Carter's words, not the fear of the road, but the quiet, the breathing, the laughter her children had started to trust again, and the memory of standing at the gate and hearing not judgment, but a question. You were already halfway out the gate, weren't you? And the man who asked it not to accuse her, but to ask her to stay. The creek was louder than usual that morning, swollen from 3 nights of hard rain in the mountains. Its voice echoed off the gulch walls, deeper, meaner, less a murmur, and more a warning. Carter had already checked the south fence line twice just to make sure the runoff hadn't taken the posts with it. He moved with caution now, every step against wet earth a test. Ayanna was hanging laundry near the barn, her arms sore but moving with rhythm. The scent of damp cotton and wind filled her lungs. Taza napped inside, curled up in a basket lined with old feed sacks. The younger kids played nearby, piling stones and pretending they were building a fortress. Tomasito had gone up the ridge early with a bundle of rabbit pelts for old Talon. Evan, her middle boy, always too fast, always too bold, had begged to be the one to explore near the creek. He'd promised to stay close to take a stick and test the ground before stepping anywhere slick. Ayanna had relented, just for an hour. Now, with her arms elbow-deep in wet linens, she couldn't shake the tightness creeping into her chest. She looked toward the trees where the edge of the creek glinted in the sun. No sign of him. She called once. No answer. Again. Nothing. Then came the sound that turned her blood cold. A scream, short, high, cut off fast. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She dropped the laundry skirts flying and sprinted toward the water. Her heart thundered louder than the creek. The wind slapped at her face. By the time she reached the bank, she saw him. Evan. Just a flash of his body tumbling in the water, arms flailing, mouth wide open. He hit a rock, went under, then surfaced again barely. The current carried him fast, spinning, pulling him downstream. Evan, she screamed, racing along the bank. Evan, but the boy couldn't hear her. His stick floated past like a taunt. She kicked off her boots, ready to leap in, already wading into the cold bite of the shallows, when something thundered past her. Carter. He'd come out of nowhere, boots flying, shirt half unbuttoned, eyes locked on the river. He threw his coat down mid-run and charged into the creek with the kind of force only a man who'd stopped thinking could summon. The current hit him sideways, dragged him down, but he fought it. One arm reached forward, the other slicing against the flow. He vanished beneath the surface once, twice. Then he emerged with Evan clutched against his chest, the boy coughing, sobbing, clawing for air. Carter's jaw clenched, legs buckling with the effort. The water tried to take them again, but he angled his body, twisted, and drove forward until his boots found mud. A wave slammed into his ribs. He staggered. A rock sliced his shoulder. Blood bloomed dark and spreading. Still, he didn't stop. Step by brutal step, Carter pulled them both to the edge and collapsed onto the bank. Ayanna dropped beside them. Evan was breathing. Crying, but breathing. She wrapped him in her arms, checking every limb, every inch of skin. Carter lay on his side, gasping, water dripping from his hair, blood running from the cut on his collarbone. "You're hurt," Ayanna said, voice breaking. He shook his head once. "Doesn't matter." She looked at him, really looked, and saw more than the blood and the soaked clothes. She saw what he'd risked, what he hadn't even paused to weigh. He didn't do it for thanks, didn't do it for pride. He'd done it because it wasn't a question. Because Evan was his now, too. Carter rolled onto his back, chest rising and falling, in hard, ragged breaths. "Family keeps each other alive," he said, voice hoarse. "That's what we are now." Ayanna couldn't speak. Her throat locked. Her arms tightened around her son, who clung to her like he was afraid to let go. The other children arrived moments later, drawn by the shouting. They ran toward the creek, skidding to a stop when they saw Evan soaked and shaking. Suni knelt beside him, tears streaming. "You're okay," she whispered over and over. "You're okay, you're okay." Carter didn't rise. He just stayed there, blinking up at the sky, letting the pain settle. Ayanna moved to his side and pressed a cloth to the gash on his shoulder. He hissed, but didn't flinch. "You didn't have to do that," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied. "But you did." "Yeah." She looked down at him. "You didn't just save my boy," she said, voice shaking. "You saved me." Carter's eyes found hers. "I know." They sat in silence, broken only by Evan's quiet sobs and the rustle of the wind. By the time Carter could stand, the blood had stopped. Ayanna helped him up, one arm around his waist, steadying him. They walked back to the house, slow, Evan carried by his brothers, wrapped in a blanket, his head resting on Tomasito's shoulder. That night, the house was quiet. The children huddled closer, not out of fear, but out of something like reverence. They had seen something they didn't have words for yet, something they'd remember long after scars had faded. Carter sat at the kitchen table while Ayanna cleaned his wound. He didn't complain, didn't twitch. She worked in silence until it was done. Then she poured him a tin cup of water and placed it in front of him. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Outside, the wind whispered through the eaves. The creek still roared in the distance, but inside something else had settled. Something permanent. Ayanna sat across from him, folded her hands, and simply breathed. The man across from her was no longer a stranger. He was hers, and she was his. Not in a way that needed to be said, but in the way a fire belongs to the hearth, and a child belongs to the arms that pull him from the river. The morning sun bled gold through the east windows, scattering across the rough wooden floor like spilled wheat. Ayanna stirred early, not from habit, but from a strange stillness, one that settled over her chest, like something was about to shift. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place with so many feet, so many lives under one roof. She lay there for a moment beside Taza, listening to the breath of each sleeping child, then slipped from the quilt and stepped into the day. Outside, the air smelled of damp earth and new ash. Carter was already at the porch, boot up on the railing, tying off the laces with one hand. His bandaged arm hung loose by his side, but his jaw was set the same way it always was when he'd made up his mind about something. "You're up early," she said, brushing a loose braid behind her ear. "Didn't sleep much." She didn't ask why. She already knew. Since the river, things had shifted between them, not in a sudden crash, but like how land softens before it sinks into itself. Quiet, inevitable. He nodded toward the barn. "Fence line needs checking again. After the storm last night. I'll come with you." They didn't speak as they walked the perimeter. The children were still curled in their bunks, and the wind hadn't yet shaken loose its voice. At the edge of the property where the land dropped off toward the gulch, Carter paused and pointed to where a small post had fallen. She crouched and helped reset it, hands brushing earth, steadying the weight. They worked side by side like they had always done it. No instruction, just motion. When they returned, Tomasito had breakfast going, eggs scrambled over fire, still a little runny. The boy handed Carter his plate first, without saying a word, just a look that spoke volumes. He hadn't stopped watching Carter since the river. Later that morning, Suni brought out her makeshift ledger and began mapping out where she wanted to plant corn in spring. She spread it across the kitchen table like it was a government document, explaining row widths and sun patterns, with the authority of someone twice her age. Carter watched with a small smile. "Looks like you've got a plan." "We're gonna grow everything," she said, eyes bright. "That way we don't need town food." Ayanna caught the flicker in Carter's expression, approval, but also worry. The tension with town hadn't faded. If anything, it had thickened. Word had gotten around that Ayanna and her children weren't just staying, they were belonging. And some folks didn't like that. By midday, the sun burned hotter, and Carter led the older boys out back to show them how to reinforce the chicken coop against coyotes. He talked as he worked, voice low but steady, teaching without lecturing. He showed them how to brace the beams, how to knot rope without fraying, and how to listen for breaks in the rhythm of the wind. "You hear silence where there shouldn't be," he said, looking up from a hammer. "That means something's watching." Tomasito nodded, jaw tight with focus. Evan mimicked his grip, swinging nails like it was war. Inside, Ayanna helped the younger children sew new pillowcases from old dresses that had worn too thin. They laughed at the crooked seams and uneven stitches, but none of them asked for new fabric. They understood what making do meant. They were born into it. That night, supper was simple cornbread, beans, wild onions Carter had foraged after the rain. Everyone sat close around the long table. The fire popped in the hearth. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke. Halfway through the meal, Carter set his tin cup down, wiped his mouth, and leaned back slightly. "You all know what you are?" he asked, voice low but even. Ayanna looked up. The children grew quiet. Evan blinked. "We're hungry." Carter chuckled. "That's true, but not what I meant." He paused. The fire crackled. "You're a tribe now, one made by choice, not blood." Suni tilted her head. "What's that mean?" Carter looked around the table, eyes settling on each of them. "It means nobody in this room is here because they had to be. We chose this, to stay, to work, to protect each other. That's more than most blood kin ever give." Tomasito swallowed, serious. "Does that mean we fight back if town people try something?" Carter nodded once. "It means we don't run scared." "But we don't start fights either," Ayanna added. "No," Carter agreed. "But we end them." That night, after the dishes were done and the children had trickled off to their beds, Ayanna stayed by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. Carter joined her, setting a tin of warm tea between them. "You believe it?" she asked softly. "That we're a tribe, I do." She hesitated. "Even if the world doesn't. Especially then." They sat in quiet for a time, listening to the wind rattle against the window panes. Outside, coyotes howled across the hills, and somewhere far off, a barn owl shrieked. Carter turned to her. "I want to go into town tomorrow." Ayanna's eyes lifted. "What for? Talk to the marshal. Make it known we're not hiding." "You sure that's smart?" "No, but it's necessary." She reached for the tea, her fingers brushing his. "You really willing to stake everything on us?" "I already did," he said simply. The next morning, Carter shaved for the first time in days, combed back his hair, and wore a shirt with buttons all the way to the top. He looked like someone who'd once belonged in town, maybe still did. But his boots were caked with dirt from their land, and his collar had a tear from where Evan had tugged it too hard last week. As he saddled the mule, Ayanna stepped onto the porch. "You tell the marshal who we are, I will. And if they don't want to hear it, I'll say it louder." She nodded. "Just don't get yourself locked up." "I won't." "You come back," she said, voice steady. He met her gaze. "Always." The children stood at the edge of the barnyard, watching as he rode off, silent, wide-eyed. For a moment they looked like the orphans they once were, afraid the world might steal the man who hadn't asked them to earn his love. But Ayanna stepped beside them and said clear and calm, he'll come back, because he doesn't leave what's his. And they believed her. That night they lit candles before the sun dipped behind the ridge as if preparing the house to welcome him home. Ayanna baked flatbread, even though they had little flour left. Suni stitched another marker flag. Evan stood guard by the fence until the stars came out. When Carter returned, dust on his shoulders, hat low over his brow, they didn't rush him, didn't swarm him. They just opened the door and let him in. 3 days passed without a whisper from town. The wind changed direction twice like it couldn't make up its mind, and the mornings grew colder, hinting at an early frost. Life on the ranch didn't pause. It couldn't. The hens still needed feeding, the firewood needed stacking, and the children, no matter how alert or worn, still found time to argue over who got the last heel of bread. But something had shifted again. Ayanna could feel it in the way the children moved. Quieter. Eyes on the horizon. They'd begun to watch the world not as kids, but as sentries. She hated it. She hated that they knew to drop low at the sound of a distant hoofbeat. Hated that Suni, who once braided flowers into her hair, now kept a knife under her pillow. And she hated most of all that, when Taza cried out at night, he didn't call for his mother. He called for Carter. Because Carter had become something more than protector now. He was anchor, root, father. That evening, after chores were done, and the children had gone to bed with bellies full of soup and cornbread, Carter sat sharpening his old skinning knife at the edge of the porch. Ayanna brought him coffee, then sat beside him, arms crossed against the night chill. "They're waiting," she said softly. "For what?" "For us to crack." Carter didn't stop moving the whetstone. "We won't." "But what if the next fire bottle lands? Then we put it out. And rebuild." She looked at him for a long moment. "You say that like it's easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But it's worth it." Silence stretched between them, warm with familiarity. The kind of silence that holds weight, not awkwardness. Then Ayanna said, "I want to give the children a name." Carter paused. "They have names. I mean our name." He turned slowly. "McBride." She nodded once. "If you'll let them." Carter looked out across the yard, where the barn loomed dark, and the wind picked up just enough to rattle the shutters. "You think a name will protect them?" "No," she said. "But it tells the world who they belong to." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "A name only means something if you're willing to stand behind it." "I know." Carter set down the blade, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked her full in the face. "Then it's theirs. Every one of them." The next morning, Ayanna gathered the children in the clearing near the old oak, the one Carter had said was here before the war, and'll be here after we're all dust. She'd laid out her good shawl like an altar cloth, and the children stood in a row, awkward, half smiling, half confused. Carter stepped up beside her, dressed clean, a shirt ironed, flat boots freshly scrubbed. He looked at each of them from Tomasito down to baby Taza. "You've lived 100 lives already," he said. "You've seen what no child should. You've survived things grown men haven't. And through it all, you stayed kind. Brave. Fierce." He paused. "But being brave doesn't mean standing alone." He turned to Ayanna. She held out the first name carved into a scrap of hide, Tomasito McBride. Then Suni McBride. Evan McBride. One by one, he called them forward. Each child stood straighter after hearing it. And when he took Taza in his arms, and whispered the name into his ear, Ayana thought her heart might tear wide open from the weight of it. Later inside, Tomasito pulled Carter aside. "Does this mean we're yours now? Like..." "Real," Carter smiled. "You've been mine since the day you stood in front of your sister when you thought I was going to raise my voice." "I wasn't scared," Tomasito said, blushing. "I know," Carter said, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's how I knew you were already family." That night they shared stew and blackberry preserves, and even Suni asked for seconds. The tension hadn't vanished, but something else had grown in its place, pride. They were no longer ghosts surviving on someone else's land. They were McBrides. But word traveled fast in Red Gulch. 2 days later, Ayana rode into town for salt and flour. She walked into the general store with her head high, and the children stayed outside near the mule. Inside, the room fell quiet. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper squinted at her. "You're still coming around?" Ayana placed the bag of coin on the counter. "I'm here to trade like anyone else." He didn't move. "You're not welcome," he said flatly. "I'm not here for welcome," she replied. "I'm here for goods. I said we don't serve." Before he could finish, the door opened behind her. Carter. He stepped inside, shoulders, broad eyes, calm but unshaking. He set a sack of potatoes down with a heavy thud beside her. "She carries my name," he said, voice low and clear. "And so do those children outside. You want to turn her away, you turn me away." The man hesitated. "You think I care what they're called?" he spat. "The town thinks you're a joke, McBride. Took in some desert scraps and started playing house." Carter stepped forward. "I buried better men than you for talking like that." The man went pale. Carter leaned in quiet now. "I've seen war. I've seen famine. I've seen boys lose their legs and scream for mothers who'd already died. And none of that shook me like the sound of my son crying 'cause someone told him he didn't deserve his name." The man said nothing. Carter took the salt and flour from behind the counter himself, laid down coin, and turned to leave. Before he stepped out, he looked back. "You don't gotta respect me, but you will respect my family." They rode home in silence. That night, the children asked how town went. Ayana only smiled. "We brought home what we needed." Suni asked, "Do we go back?" Carter nodded. "Always. Even if they hate us." He crouched by the hearth, poked the fire, and looked at them. "Your name is McBride now, and that means we don't bow." Later, when the children were asleep and the stars flickered high above the ridge, Ayana sat beside Carter on the porch. "You meant what you said?" she asked. "Every word. And if town comes harder next time, then we stand harder." She reached over, laced her fingers through his. "We're not just surviving anymore," she said. He nodded, eyes on the dark horizon. "No," he said. "We're claiming what's ours." It started just before dawn. The air had a strange stillness to it, like the land was holding its breath. Not even the rooster crowed. No owls called from the trees. No wind moved the pine needles. Ayana was already awake. She'd been up since Taza stirred at first light, his fever finally breaking, his cheeks flushed with sleep. She'd just finished stoking the fire in the kitchen stove when she heard the first sound: hooves. Too many to be a traveler. Too slow to be a chase. Deliberate. She stepped onto the porch, bare feet against the cold boards. The rising sun cracked the horizon just enough to throw long shadows across the field. Dust moved along the main road, like a serpent winding its way toward the house. Tomasito appeared behind her. "It's them." Carter was already saddled up by the corral rifle strapped across his back. He didn't need to be told. He'd felt it too. The stillness, the warning. "Get the kids in the barn," he said without turning. "Pack light. We don't run, but we protect." Ayanna nodded and ran inside. The children didn't cry, didn't scream. They'd been trained for this moment, not with fear, but with resolve. Within minutes, the youngest were hidden in the root cellar under the barn. Suni helped carry bags. Evan pulled the dog in by its collar. Tomasito tied shut the big door and slipped through the side. Carter stood in the yard when the riders arrived. 6 of them. Men from town. Some he recognized. Some he didn't. All of them armed. One had a torch unlit. Another had a coil of rope on his saddle. All of them wore the same look: certainty. The kind of certainty men wear when they think the law is on their side. The one in front, a thick-jawed man named Griggs, dismounted with the grace of someone used to throwing their weight around. "Carter," he said flatly. "You're trespassing." Griggs ignored it. "Heard you're claiming Injuns now, making them McBrides. You handing out names like Sugar Carter didn't flinch. What's your business here?" "Our business is keeping Red Gulch from turning into a bastard camp. You come to say that with rifles and rope we came to finish what the town won't." Carter nodded once. "Then you're going to want to start digging." Griggs scowled. "You think you can stand against all of us? I don't need to," Carter replied. "Just need to stand long enough." The second man moved forward, flicked his reins, stepped off. "You think this land makes you untouchable?" "No," Carter said. "This family does." Griggs lifted his rifle, and that was the moment it happened. A sharp whistle cut through the air. One of the boys, hidden up on the ridge, sent a mirror flash straight into Griggs's eyes. He flinched, lowering the gun. From the barn, a second whistle blew. Then a third. Then silence. Carter stood his ground. "You light that torch," he said, "and the whole territory's gonna hear how you brought war to a woman and her children." The third rider shifted nervously. "Griggs, maybe this ain't—" "Shut it," Griggs snapped. He stepped forward, torch in hand, flint at the ready. And then the barn door opened. Ayanna stepped out, unarmed, unafraid. Behind her the children followed, not hidden, not huddled, standing. Each of them held something: a water bucket, a rake, a carving knife. Not weapons. Tools. But the look in their eyes was sharper than any steel. They didn't come out to fight. They came out to be seen. And the riders did see them, not just as mouths to feed or burdens to bear. They saw a family, a tribe, a fortress built on loss and rebuilt with love. Griggs hesitated. "They're children," the fourth rider muttered. "Not your fight, Griggs," the second added. But Griggs shook his head. "They don't belong here." "They do now," Carter said, "and I'd bleed for every one of them." The silence that followed was long, thick, unmoving. Griggs flicked the flint once. It sparked, but didn't catch. Then again, nothing. One of the others cursed under his breath. "Let's go, this is bad ground." Griggs snarled, but the others were already turning their horses, even the man with the rope. Eventually, he was alone. He threw the torch down, unlit, and rode away. Carter didn't move until they were just specks on the road. Then he turned to the children. "You all right?" he asked. They nodded one by one. Suni stepped forward. "I wasn't scared." "I know," Carter said softly. Later that night, as the stars came out and the children slept curled beside the hearth, Ayanna sat on the porch beside Carter. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Carter whispered, "They came to break us, but all they did was prove we're unbreakable." Ayanna looked at him, moonlight catching the edge of his profile. "You think they'll come again, Wabi?" And next time he took her hand. Same answer. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think survival was the goal. But this feels like more." He nodded. "It is." She closed her eyes, listening to the wind rustle the grass. "Do you think they'll ever call us neighbors?" she asked. "No," Carter said. "But one day they'll call us something they can't ignore. And what's that? A family that didn't back down." Autumn came early that year, the kind that paints the leaves before September ends. Gold and rust crept across the hills like fire that didn't burn. The mornings were crisp, the nights long, but there was peace in the wind now. Not silence, not safety, but peace. The kind you earn. Tomasito harvested the last of the squash from the south field. Evan ran the trap line with Carter and came home muddy and proud, holding up a rabbit like it was treasure. Suni was already sewing blankets for winter, her tiny stitches almost perfect now. Even little Taza had learned to walk steady across the porch without falling. The ranch was full, not of things, of life. Neighbors never came. The townsfolk kept their distance, offering neither kindness nor trouble. That was fine. The McBrides had long stopped asking for permission to exist. One morning a letter arrived. Carter found it nailed to the gatepost. No return name. Just a single sheet of paper folded neat. He opened it slowly and read it twice. "What is it?" Ayanna asked, watching him from the doorway. "A request," Carter said. "Marshall wants to meet. In the town square." She raised a brow. "Alone?" He nodded. Ayanna looked past him toward the hills. "You think it's a trick?" Carter folded the paper again. "I think it's an ending." She didn't ask more. She didn't have to. The next day he shaved, buttoned a clean shirt, and packed no weapon. Before he left, he pulled the children together. "You're not what people say you are," he told them. "You're what you choose to be. Every day." Evan asked, "What if they try to lie about us again?" "Then we speak louder." Tomasito stepped forward. "You need backup." Carter smiled. "I've got all the backup I need right here." He rode out before noon, slow and steady down the same road, where months ago 6 riders had come with fire in their eyes. This time the wind was different. When he reached the town square, the marshal was already waiting. Gray coat, worn hat, no badge on his chest. Just him. Carter dismounted, tied off the reins, and stood across from him. "You asked for this," Carter said. "I did," the marshal nodded. "Because I figured you'd earned something more than silence." Carter waited. The marshal glanced around. A few shopkeepers paused behind their windows, but no crowd gathered. "Town's changing," the marshal said finally. "Slow. Not fast enough for some. Too fast for others." "I didn't come to talk about their discomfort," Carter replied. "No. You came because I needed to say something." The marshal looked him in the eye. "You did what you said you'd do. You raised those kids. You stood by that woman. You never struck first, and you never backed down, because it was right." The marshal nodded, and the law finally caught up with right. He pulled a folded document from his coat. "County Registrar. Names are legal now. All of them. as McBride's. Carter took the paper slowly. His hands didn't shake, but inside something in him shifted. You didn't need to come all this way to hand me paper. No, the marshal said, but I needed to say it out loud. He stepped forward, voice quieter now. Town won't give you a parade, but they won't come for you again either. Not if I have anything to say about it. Carter looked at him long and hard, then nodded once. It was enough. On the way back, the sky opened up with a soft rain. Not heavy, just enough to soften the dust and cool the air. When he rode up to the house, the children were waiting at the fence. Tomasito climbed the gate first. Well, Carter held up the paper. You're official now. Suni let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. Ayanna didn't smile at first. She just walked to him, eyes wide, and pulled him in like someone returning from war. Later that night, they lit candles, not for fear, but celebration. Ayanna cooked stew with the last of the carrots. They opened a jar of honey she'd been saving, and the children each took turns holding the paper like it was more than parchment, like it was proof they weren't invisible anymore. Suni whispered, "We have a place." Carter nodded. "You always did." After supper, they sat out on the porch, the fireflies blinking across the field, the wind singing low. Ayanna turned to Carter. "You still believe in the land that it holds us?" He looked out over the field. "No. Not just the land." "What then this?" he said, motioning to the house. "The work, the dirt under your nails, the way Tomasito watches over the littles, the way you don't flinch when the wind changes." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave them a name," she said. "You gave them a future," he replied. They stayed like that for a long time, as stars blinked into place, as peace settled not because danger was gone, but because they'd made peace with facing it. In the end, the ranch wasn't saved by guns or fences. It was saved by choice, by standing, by saying we belong here and no one gets to tell us otherwise. And that was the truth they'd live by. Not a grand gesture, not a headline, just the daily choosing of each other. Each dawn, each storm, each moment they dared to build something permanent in a world that called them temporary. And when the wind howled again, they didn't hide. They stood in the doorway side by side, because they were a family, unshakable, unbreakable, home.